should start probably. I'm Kate, I'm the Community and Development Manager at World Book Day.
Hi everyone, it's lovely to be here. I'm Amy Greatrex and I'm a reception teacher from Nottingham.
Hi everyone, I'm Teresa Kremen from the Open University.
And I'm Debbie Thomas, also from the Open University.
Hello, I'm Vicky Newman.
I'm having from all of us as the session goes on. Please do pop a note in the chat or wave at us if you can't at any point hear us. We're turning on microphones on and off, and even though it's now been 4 years, still can't always remember to do that at the right moment. So please do shout if you can't hear anything. So welcome to this session, which is a first for us in terms of a CPD offer, which is going to stretch beyond World Book Day itself. So we're delighted to be working in partnership with the Open University Reading for Pleasure team on this piece of work. And we have curated for you a series of sessions responding to research that we and the wider sector have carried out around the things that children are saying about what they find difficult around reading for pleasure. And we've used those as prompts for some reflective conversations with practitioners. So that's teachers, librarians, authors, and reading volunteers as well, in terms of how these things play out in various settings and how they responded to. Now, I think we all know that there is no golden bullet in this situation, because in every context, this is a relational experience. It depends on the child, the adult, the books available, the space is available, and where everyone is on that journey. So what we hope we've created for you is a series of reflective conversations that help you have some similar reflective conversations in your own settings, and also do give you some prompts for different types of practice and signpost you out to various pieces of research that might support all of that too. So in front of you can see the series. How, just very quickly, practically, these will turn up on both of our websites each month. We'll send you an email each time a new one has gone live, and then there'll be a further live webinar on the 12th of June, which you are automatically invited to if you've been part of this one, and that will be a sort of all-round reflective conversation, pulling together some of the threads of the conversations that have happened, but we really hope that we'll also pull together some of your thoughts as participants in this thinking journey with us. So just very quickly, I'm sure you're all very aware that World Book Day is coming up very soon. Just a quick reminder that our whole purpose is to support children reading for pleasure, and particularly those growing up in disadvantage and inequality. So this is a part of that. And the reason that we are delighted to do this every year is that we can see, even if it's just for a short time, that this has an impact. So we know that children swap their tokens for books. We know that as a result of participating in World Book Day, children say they're reading more, that they're talking about books more, and they do some of those behaviours. And what we're trying to do is to build from the campaign into a year-round ways of working that can continue those behaviours kind of throughout a child's life. And the message that we're sharing, so you're using our Power for Good, is how you can support children to develop reading for pleasure. And we've identified from research and with colleagues, including the Open University, CLPE and the National Literacy Trust, 6 behaviours, elements, we still love a perfect word for these, we haven't quite got there yet, that support a child to read for pleasure, that are networked together. Now, hopefully none of these feel in any way controversial or even new to you necessarily, but these are the things that support children. So being read to regularly, all the way through primary school, both at school and at home, having books and access to books at home and at school through the huge variety of ways that can happen, finding time to read, so making that space and time for a habit, having trusted help to find a book, both from adults but also from peers, having a choice in what to read. This feels crucial actually, and is one of the things that children, when we come onto the research, you'll see that it's one of the things that children flag most clearly that they find the hardest and also the least accessible in terms of these principles. And making reading fun. Now, of course, World Book Day is a huge example of that, but actually we're not talking about just an enormous party atmosphere in this principle. What we're talking about is those social, relational, interactive moments around reading, where reading feels more like a hobby than work. And just to bring us back to earth, because obviously World Book Day is a hugely exciting moment, but it is hugely necessary that we're all thinking about this right now. The most recent National Literacy Trust, oh my goodness, I wish I could say that word, National Literacy Trust annual literacy survey identified that the reading for pleasure is at its lowest level since 2005. I'm sure all of you recognise that the situation in your settings as well. And so whilst it's still the biggest indicator of child's future success, we've got some work to do in terms of encouraging children to build this habit, and that's what we're hoping we're going to be doing with this series too. So we realised that as an organisation, we realised that we'd heard a lot about what adults said about children and reading, and their gatekeepers had said. What we really wanted to hear was what children wanted to say. So through various interactions with children, starting with some work that we did with the Mercer's Company, which I think Teresa's going to talk about a little bit later, so I won't delve into it. We started talking to children directly about the things that they were finding tricky around reading for pleasure, and we've compared those across this slide. We'll share some of this in a bit more detail, so I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but just want to pull out a couple of things that this is where we really understood that children really don't feel that they have a choice in what to read, and they feel under supported in terms of making some of those choices. And the other thing that really stuck out, and particularly in our most recent research with Be No Brain, was that children found that it's being perceived as fun or a hobby was the first starting barrier to them understanding that they wanted to do it more often. So trying to reframing that, where reading sat for children, felt crucial. But the other thing that we noticed across all of this was that children were saying very similar things, and that's what prompted us to put this series together and pull the barriers out that we did. Sorry. So I'm going to hand over now to the Open University colleagues to.
Yes, so an opportunity for us to start thinking about those barriers, and perhaps just by talking about some of the barriers we might have experienced ourselves. So Teresa, when have you had difficulty reading or getting into reading? What sort of barriers have you experienced?
I think the biggest memory for me would be being at university studying psychology, and I was clearly reading for the degree, but I found that my kind of pleasure reading, my reading beyond the work focus for getting that BSc, just trailed off. There was no space or time for it. I used to read poetry in particular, but also read novels, and that just kind of slid. I didn't even pick up magazines at the time because I had to keep focused, be a worker, get on with the job, and that was just difficult. I didn't really find a way around it.
Oh, and similarly, actually, I found during the pandemic, I stopped reading for pleasure in the way some people chose perhaps to do that as an escape. Yeah. I found I was on screen a lot of the time, and so I stopped actually my own reading. I found it really hard to get back into books and concentrate for any length of time. So let's just give you an opportunity now, if you'd like to have a think about, when have you had difficulty getting into reading? How did you behave? When and where were you when that happened? Let's just see if people could share some examples of that in the chat. Start thinking about ourselves as readers. Let's give everyone a moment.
So I'm with you.
When you had your own children, yes. And when we're tired, yes, lots of us find that, don't we? Harder perhaps when we have younger children. People perhaps they're picking up technology as well, being one of the issues. Getting distracted, yeah. Just during term time, being a teacher is
longing for the holidays, the beach, and a glass of prosecco.
I find it much easier
for me reading.
Yeah.
Not just the drink, but I mean, it's the relaxation. It's that kind of sense of downtime that you can enjoy in that space.
And also, some places work better for us as readers, don't they? I find, some bed definitely works better, but also different kind of mental spaces, I guess, as well. Somebody talking about work and time balances in relationship to work. Okay, so what we're doing really is thinking about ourselves as readers and reflecting on our own behaviours so that we can then think about how that might hold some of the answers or some of the suggestions of what we might do with the children that we're working with when they're encountering barriers as readers. So I'm really pleased to welcome to join us this afternoon Amy Greatrix, who is an OU UKLA Far Shore RFP Award winner as an experienced teacher from South Wilford School in Nottingham. Amy's going to she shared a lot of her practice with us on the OU website, but she's going to tell us now about some of the barriers she's encountered with her children before we hear towards the end of the session about some of her practical approaches. Amy, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So when I started thinking about, I know the answer, it's going to be tech, and, you know, after a busy day, kind of too tired to read and all of those things. And, you know, same for children, they've got iPads, games, there's more activities for them to do when they come home now. But actually, when I've thought about the children that I work very closely with at school, and I've noticed and I've reflected and I've talked to them about it as well, I've actually realised that it's very diverse. They've got barriers in common, but they've also got barriers that are kind of unique to them. So I'll tell you about some of the children. So the first child I'll tell you about is a boy. He's in year 6 now. I've been working with him on reading for pleasure since he was in year 4. He's just, you know, a typical kind of great reader, which I also think we need to unpick during this blog series, that kind of image that we all have of that, you know, Matilda. So by that, I mean that he reads quickly, far quicker than me. He's got a very high reading age, and he reads a lot. His barrier to reading is so unique. It's that actually for a primary school child, he wants to read books that we wouldn't have in our library. So he's very interested in World War II, sci-fi, kind of books that just, yeah, we can't stock in our library because the themes are, you know, maybe too violent or scary or aggressive. So that's his barrier to reading. Very interesting one. Another child, he's currently in my class. He's just amazing, full of life. When I read aloud to him, he has a physical reaction to it, the pleasure he gets and the focus. However, I know that he doesn't have many books at home. I know he doesn't get taken to the library, and no judgment on that at all. But that's his barrier to reading. He loves listening to stories, but he hasn't got those books at home. Another child, she's in, I want to say she's year 1 or year 2, and I was speaking to her mom. Her barrier to reading, again, she's, you know, she's got the will, she's got the skill, she likes reading. But there is a buzz in that year group about the Isadora Moon books. I've actually recently joined this buzz myself and discovered her. So I love her books. This child likes her books, has read some of her books. However, she doesn't necessarily want to read them, but her friends are kind of saying, to be a reader at our age, these are the books you would read. So I kind of think there is something there with peer pressure, and that's starting quite young. I'm sure we're all aware of certain books that get shared as adults, like lessons in chemistry. I tried to read it. I know it's amazing. I know Teresa loves it, but it's just, I just didn't want to carry on reading it. So I think it's interesting for some children that starts at that age, that peer pressure, what you should be reading compared to actually what you want to read. There's another child, he's in year 4 now, but I want to talk about him when he was in year 2. Again, likes reading, had the skill. He read very quickly, and he was really, really into the Horrible History series. And every week I'd kind of check in with him, and I try and find horrible history books for him that, you know, are a bit alternative, or kind of some of their more abstract ones. He just read them all. So maybe this is more a barrier about me as a teacher. I kind of had to think, what else can I give him? He was just getting through text that quickly. Where else can you go now to keep that reading for pleasure, like to give it a longevity? You'll be happy to know he's now into sci-fi, and he's now recommending books to me now that he's in year 4, and it's become really reciprocal. And then I just want to tell you about my 2 daughters. So one is in year 4, one is in year 1. The child, my daughter Tilly, she's in year 4. If you saw her bookcase, you would say this child has the best reading identity. She's got a poo and a gnu on it, Egyptology, Bunny versus Monkey. I've just bought the new one today for her. She's got an amazing, rich reading identity. However, even me coming here today, she was rejecting, because she's struggling to read. She has reading recovery, but it's still a battle for her. She's got that mindset of, the reading world isn't for me. I'm not welcome. I can't read quickly. I struggle with it. It's hard. And actually, this is one of my barriers. As I'm sure you know, I love reading. However, I'm quite slow at reading, and I've got a hang up on that myself. She's exactly the same. It's almost as if she pushes it away. Even when she's tempted, it's almost like, this isn't for me. I'm not welcome here because I don't see that reflected back in society. So her barrier is absolutely a mindset one. how we unpick that, there's things I try and get various books for her, but that's something I'd like us to unpick over this series. And then my youngest daughter, I actually need to read this out because she's kind of a more typical reader. But I just thought, actually, I want a conversation with her about this. So I said, what stops you from reading? She's only 5. And she said, very articulate, I don't know all of the letters in the book. Basically, I can't read yet. I'm trying. And then she instantly said, I was going to ask you the same thing. What makes it difficult for you? Now, I love that, the fact that she's asking me back. This is what we need to happen in school and at home more. And my gut response was, sometimes I get worried about it and overwhelmed. Now, I'm 38 and, it's quite a powerful thing to even say that on this webinar, but I can't explain it. Sometimes I do. I get worried and overwhelmed about reading. So just to kind of finish, I really like the fact that we had that honest conversation. Everyone who knows me and who loves me knows that my identity is books. However, my youngest daughter, who I thought I'd been very honest with about my reading life, it was a shock to her because she said, but books are your favourite thing. Why do you get worried about it? They're what you love. So yeah. And I think as well, we need to kind of look at, and I do try and do this with my work for the OU, what it is to be an early years reader. Because all of the children in my class, they're brilliant readers. It just looks a little bit different. They're talking about the pictures and sharing them in that way. So their barrier is, like my daughter's, it's that they're learning the actual art of reading, the skill of it. So how do we help them access text a little bit more as well?
Thank you, Amy. That was brilliant and reflective of the conversations we've been having as well. So really great to hear those brought to life. So we're going to come back to you now and your reading barrier. And I'm going to invite you to have a think about what solutions you make for yourself when you're finding it challenging. So we're going to assume that in this instance you do want to read, but you're for whatever reason for the reasons that you've listed already, that you're finding it a challenge. What are the behaviours you then go on to do to unlock that for yourself? So I'll give you an example. I often get distracted when I'm tired. I find it easier to flick through on my own phone. So if I know I want to actually read, I have to put my phone in a different room so that I get going for reading in the first instance. So that's nothing more radical than that you need to have. So same thing, if you want to pop your behaviour changes in the chat, that would be great. Thank you. I like the rereading. That's a really good idea.
Yeah, and someone's saying that switching to a different device. That's what I often try. I often use audiobooks to help me when I get into a bit of a reading lull.
I think one of the things I tend to do is read because of other, nudges, as it were. I read because I want to, but book club, for example, that I'm a member of, I always read the book for book club, or nearly always finish it. So it's kind of another challenge that's been set for me, but I know that when we go, we'll have a glass of wine, a blather, and it's worth reading the book because we're going to talk about it. So for me, that works.
I think someone said there in the chat they set themselves a goal, like I'll read a few pages, I'll read this number of pages. They're setting their own goals around it.
And sometimes you can't stop, can you, in any case? The goal becomes the book. Like you've got so far in it, you just have to stay there until it finishes or until you get to a next stretch of meaning, as it were. Yes, that's a really lovely point, Vicky Varley, saying that you love that Amy gets to know her own kids, because that's modelling both from the professional but also the personal engagement, and knowing our readers is key to this agenda, as we all know.
So we've been thinking there about some of our own reading behaviours, and now we're going to go on and think a little bit. Teresa's going to share some of the research with us into this area and give us a bit more insight through the research.
Thanks. So, research into reading for pleasure can help us as educators, clearly, when we're thinking about the barriers of children's experience as readers. And I've just finished actually a fascinating 3-year study funded by the Mercer's Company, which Kate referred to, which involved reviewing the research literature around reading for pleasure and indeed actually writing for pleasure. And we drew that review together, and indeed World Book Day, one of the 6 organisations, 6 programmes that were involved in the research. We documented the rich practice of these organisations as well as understood the research literature better. And we combined those two to create a framework for practice. We summarise that in this document. If you click on one more, Deb, that'll show the document to colleagues, and we can send you the link to this document should you be interested to follow it up. But out of the many factors that we read in relation to the research agenda and that understanding of the programmes, we found really that, well, I'm arguing today that there are 4. There are many, many factors, but for today, for this webinar, we're just choosing 4 to highlight. The first is intrinsic motivation. The second, choice and agency, which Kate's already referred to, and the Be No Young People voicing that really clearly. The third is informal book talk, that casual, relaxed conversation about text. And the fourth, role models, adult role models, whether those are teachers, librarians, parents, grandparents. Is important to have role models in your life, like Amy for her children, who showcase that reading matters, that they enjoy it. So let's look at those in order. If we look at the nature of motivation first, the research evidence is really clear here. Intrinsic motivation is much more influential on young people choosing to read than extrinsic. Intrinsic motivation, intrinsically motivated readers, for example, are those who enjoy it because they're fascinated by dinosaurs, perhaps. They're curious about what happens next. They care about the characters, maybe, and they want the character to win out. So their desire to know, to get engaged, to be involved, makes a difference to them powering forward within the context of the text. And so they read on, they sustain and develop their pleasure in reading through the personal satisfaction that is developed through that intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation can dominate, though, in professional practice. It relates to the kind of reading that we're doing for other people, for getting certificates, for pleasing mummy, for being, correct in school because we have to take part in a competition and we have to read so many books or so many words and we have to do it by a week on Tuesday, whatever the date is. Do you see where I'm coming from? That reading's for others, not for the young people. That's us reading for others rather than for ourselves. And of course, there's also social motivation. Now, that's been very much less explored, the influence of peers and relational connections, but it deserves more attention, in my view. But the real point here is that motivation is malleable. We can make a difference through understanding more about reading motivation and paying attention to it. And following the webinar, we'll be sending you some articles that you may choose to read. There's a link to one around motivation where this diagram came from that you could follow up on. So let's now turn to choice and agency. And we'd like to invite you now to get involved again and to look at this selection of 6 books and to see if those were the only books that you had available to you that were laid out on the table. You're not, after all, a yellow reader or a blue reader. You're perhaps a free reader. Well, that's interesting. If you weren't free, what were you before? But anyway, besides that, if you're having the choice, which one of these would catch your eye? And Debbie's going to launch a poll. We'd like you to choose one each, entirely up to you what you choose. And then once you have, could you pop in the chat line your rationale for it? Why did you choose that particular text? What drew you to it? Was it the author? Was it the illustration? Was it the front cover? Was it the genre? Over to you to have a choose. You can begin to see the poll emerging. I'm not sure if you can, but we can see here.
Yeah.
Not yet. Okay. Not sure if you can see us, but I find it very fascinating what's happening here. There's a kind of fight going on between what do you see when you look at a tree and Lila and the blue fox. But it might shift in a minute. Who knows? 75 educators making a choice over 7 books. I think. Really interesting.
Teacups come up a little bit.
Up goes teacup with a little bit of visualization. You can actually see the percentages if I can read from this distance. Okay. 57 is 71. Please, if you can vote, do now or forever hold your peace, as people used to say.
A little bit longer.
We can get to 60, then we get to over 80% of participation. Yep, we got to 81. Let's end the poll now and claim it. Go for it.
Ending the poll. And then we can share the results with you. So you should be able to see the results now. And you can see that actually more of you chose Layla and the Blue Fox right there in Lower Targos. Interestingly, though, there's quite an even spread there amongst some of the others.
Very low key for Our Story Starts in Africa. Very low key for Nikhil and very low key for Being Me, poems about thoughts. Is that because we don't know what it is? Is that because you're less keen on poetry? Let's look at the chat line and see what people are saying about why they chose the book they did. Okay, let's get to that chat line and see what you're saying. The front cover, somebody's saying, looked intriguing. It's a brilliant book. I do recommend. And indeed, other people, front cover. Don't we use this phrase in school? Don't judge a book by its cover. But okay, fair enough. We do. We judge a book by a cover. I do too. Somebody's loving animals and the fact that Lila and the Blue Fox. Okay, so there's a connection to my interest there by one particular colleague. And Chloe saying, I chose the tree because I like nature. I'm interested in nature. Now, Chloe, I own that book. Honestly, I haven't read it. I even got it on the train on the way here. I mean, I carried it from home. It's part of a pack that I was sent, and I haven't read it yet. I don't know that I'm anti-nature, but perhaps I'm not so keen as you. So what I think I'm trying to highlight here is we're unique. We're different as readers. We're all different people in the world, and children, like adults, have their own interests, passions, likes and dislikes. Children, like adults, will choose according to their mood. I feel like a funny book. I feel like a sad book. Or my mate lent me that book and he says it's really good. And so some of you may know Kieran Millward Hargrave's other work, Julia and the Shark, for example, and you may be choosing based on the name of the author. So, but if you've never heard of Kieran Millward Hargrave, well, how can you choose based on her? So we need to recognise, I would argue, that choice and agency are king in this space. And there are a trillion research projects and studies right across the world that evidence this. When children are asked, they want choice. But of course, they want a rich choice, a rich range to be able to turn to. And in a study I did with Rebecca Coles, we found, drawing on the School Library Association's database around a particular survey that had been undertaken for young people, that only 14% of those young people, nearly 2,000 of them, only 14% were choosing based on their teacher's recommendations, or at least wouldn't ask their teacher. What they did, over half of them said, we just go to the shelf, see what's there and grab it and move on. So we as educators have a real responsibility for helping them develop the skill of browsing, the skill of choosing, and the knowledge around text. And of course, that means that we're moving to the next key strand, which is around the ability to make a difference by being enabled, offered spaces, not only to choose, but to begin to talk about text. And if we hold the reins too tightly and we say, this is my space in the classroom, we're never going to create those communities of readers, because this is our space. And what my aim is here is to create reading for pleasure, you choosing to read at home. So the research evidence tells us very clearly we need to honour their choices, but we need to support those choices so that they can exercise their rights as readers and reflect on their choices and whether they made good ones or bad ones. But clearly the better choices you make, the wise choices, creates a legacy of past satisfactions that will power you on. And that takes us to the third strand that I've chosen to highlight, and that is around informal book chat, the role it plays in motivating, socially motivating readers and deepening their engagement with the text. Keith Oatley says, which I think is just a lovely phrase, to talk about fiction is arguably almost as important as to have read it in the first place. And that's, I suppose, what I go to book club for, because that's the place we talk about the book that we've just read and then debate and discuss the meanings of it, people bring different elements to the table. But it's the nature of that talk that matters most. In our book club, I'm not saying it's perfect, it's been going for 25 years, we drink, we eat, we blether. Sometimes we blether about the book first, sometimes we take an hour before we get to the book. And then we have a long disagreement around it. Nobody asks questions. Nobody asks anybody in the room to infer, to deduce. Nobody checks on anybody who's speaking in a full sentence. Nobody asks anybody to offer a rational reason, an argument for what they said, or to defend their ration or argument. They just chat, and nobody's being assessed in that space. We're sharing our multiple layered interpretation of the text, and very often we're learning from Nadia, who's the most well-read lady in the room, and who's always recommending other books that are connected to the book we're reading. People are going, what's that one again, Nadia? Who's that by? Have they made a film of that? And we think so-and-so would be good in the starring place. We often cast the people in the film. So it's that kind of low-key, relaxed level that we're trying to create in our classrooms, because then we begin to see reading as social, as a collective endeavour, communal endeavour. And although we recognise, all of us, that reading is at moments solitary, at many other times it is a collective and communal journey. And that brings us then to the fourth strand that I wanted to highlight, and that is about the power of reading role models. These might be parents or grandparents. They might be teachers, librarians, teaching assistants, SLT, or indeed the young people's peers. As Amy said before, peers can put pressure on young people, so we have to pay attention to whether the peers are inviting in, recommending and supporting, or expecting and requiring, which indeed teachers might do too, expecting and requiring to read this book because it's on the progression of the next book. So authentic real reading role models share their enthusiasm, they share their pleasure, they share their experience as readers. And those teachers and other educators become involved and invested in the young people's reading journeys. And that responsive, attuned involvement, as the Mercer research has highlighted for us, will help children find what reading is intrinsically good for. It will help children make wise choices so they develop a legacy of past satisfactions. And it will, over time, help them reduce the barriers and find what reading is good for and what pleasure they find in it, so that they're motivated and interactive young people as readers. I hope that gives a quick summary of what is a very complex space, but an interesting one to read.
And now I think Amy's going to talk to us a little bit more about what she's tried in her classroom and her experiences of working with overcoming some of these barriers.
I'll just start by saying how I found out. So you probably, from what I've said, you can kind of already hear that it's my teacher knowledge over time, really, and it's the building of relationships. And I always go back to Rita Pearson and what she says about relationships and championing each child and individuals, but talking to them and the parents as well, and noticing, which I will come on to. So the solutions, there are lots of barriers. And there are, unique barriers and barriers in common, but actually there are so many solutions or ways we can try to help. And actually lots of them are really simple, they don't cost much money, and they're really achievable on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to start, the first thing is, if you want lots and lots of wonderful ideas in specific areas, please go to the Open University website. You can download any example of practice. I do it regularly, I'll just pick one at random. And you learn so much and you get lots of ideas to use in the class. But actually the common themes when I've thought about solutions are talking, so being really social, listening as well, actively listening to children and parents and staff when they're talking about their reading lives, noticing as well. In my TRG, I'll say for the first 3 months before they kind of start working on little projects in class, that just notice. Something will happen, you will see something or something not happening, and that's what you'll act on. So actually taking the time to stop and notice what's going on with RFP and barriers, who is going to the book corner, who isn't. That's really powerful. And then reacting. So whatever you do, like if you do, World Book Day, all these amazing things, actually what's the impact of that? Trying to think, like with the reading blankets that I do, what have I learned from that and where can this take me? And also finding books, gifting books, but most of all being really honest and authentic in everything you do. Don't just walk around with a book to kind of be like, I'm a reading teacher. Actually have read that book as well and actually want to engage children in it. So the lack of books at school, lack of books at home, it's a massive issue. I think really one of the main things that I do or try to do is I do try and get books into class that I know the children like and kind of run with certain themes. But also, as well as a phonics book, the children are allowed to take reading for pleasure books home. They have stars on them. There's a great range. There's the Beano, there's Barbie annuals, which they all love at the moment. Lots of fiction, non-fiction, and they have that choice as well. So that means that child in my class that hasn't got many books at home has lots of opportunity to take books home that I've read aloud in class as well. In terms of funding for schools and getting books across your school, there are lots of things I could suggest, like, obviously shouting out for donations, bookmark charities, things like that. But actually, I think the crucial one is going to your SLT. I'm actually a member of SLT, and even I find this quite terrifying. But I think be really brave about it. We know the research, we know the stats, the data. I know from myself, I'm only here today because of Reading for Pleasure and it changed my life. Go to them and campaign that you need a certain amount each year. We had lots of Beast Quest books at our school. They're now all gone because they're red, they're in bags, children hide them from each other, which is great, that's what we want. But now we need more Beast Quest books. So you constantly need to replenish your finances with that. And I think SLT, it really is the only answer, I'm afraid. Obviously, reading aloud, never underestimate the power of reading aloud to children. As I was saying with early years, that really means then children know the pleasure, that intrinsic pleasure of hearing you read a book aloud. Yesterday, I read The Baddies by Julia Donaldson and Axel Scheffler to my class. And it was silent. I don't know what I was doing, maybe some funny voices at various points, but they were like, who is the worst of the baddies? So for them now, if I put that in the book corner, they can access it if I let them take it home. I always say to them as well, I don't know if this happens or not, I say, you don't need your parents to read you the book. If you're not reading at home, or if your parents are too busy, you know, I'm really guilty of this as well as a parent. I kind of give them permission. I say, you can get your book out without a grown up and read it and enjoy it and look at the pictures. In terms of parent engagement, there are lots of things you can do. I'm sure you know, obviously, you know, book clubs, kind of breakfast with books, and getting parents in to support reading for pleasure. That's so important. But I think one of the kind of really crucial things I do, and I know it makes a difference to me, is I'll try and have some informal book conversations with parents. I can't obviously speak to 31 parents about their reading lives, but I can absolutely try and talk to about 3, 4, 5. I might be talking about something else to start with, and then be like, oh, what's your favourite book? Often parents will come back to me and they'll say, actually, I used to be a reader, but I haven't read for ages, and I'm really busy and all of this. So what I do then is I gift them a book. I honestly think the power of this act of kindness, of saying you can borrow this for as long as you like, because I've got lots of copies of this book that I'll tell you about. I think it's enough, and it has helped quite a few of my parents get back into reading, and then they're being reading role models and seeing the benefit of getting their children to read for pleasure. The book, if you're interested, is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. It's my go-to book to give to parents because I think everyone can have a positive reader response to that. It actually changed my life, which is probably a whole other webinar. But
Can I jump in a minute?
Yeah.
I just want to say that it might not be a book, it might be a magazine to leave Hello, if you read Hello, or Red Magazine, which I sometimes read, or the newspaper on your desk, and to be able to help parents register that we're not trying to get them to be novel readers only, although we might want to share what we're reading in that respect, but to create that kind of sense that reading is a wide range of different kinds of texts, and registering and recognizing that's, I think, just really key too. I'm sure you do, but I just want to kind of give the audience the feel that we're bookaholics, as it were. We've got to recognize the diversity in genre.
Amy, it'd be great if you could just say that we've had a few questions in the chat. Before we deal with all of them, somebody has asked what's a reading blanket. So a reading or a book blanket, if you'd like to just say a bit.
Literally, I've got a rainbow blanket. It's just a blanket or a towel, and I put it out on the floor, and I will put on it only books that I currently love. You could actually, I've just realised, you could reverse this, couldn't you? And that's given me an idea for World Book Day. But basically, it's time to talk to children about yourself and your own reading identity. So when I do that, I will put on their Pride and Prejudice. I will put on One Day. And even in early years, I will say, I won't go into too much detail, it's age appropriate at all points, but I will say this book made me cry for a whole day. And I'll be honest about that. Now, with the reading blanket, you can kind of take books off over time and add them, and it's a really quick circle time activity. You can get it out, and kind of, it's a great time to develop book talk. And then children also do it back. So I will message parents and I'll say, can your child bring a bag of books in? Now that's getting the parent and the child to have that relationship at home as well, and to kind of go through, which books are you going to choose? Which ones do you want to tell your class about? Which ones do you like? And then when they do that in front of me, I can see their reading identity, and then I can read those aloud, but I can also tailor book choices and other recommendations to them. I'm currently doing a read aloud project this year, which has lots of bags of books going backwards and forwards linked to that. In terms of solutions, I've just got a few more, if that's okay. I have managed, a bit like Teresa, I've managed to get a book club with the parents going at school, which has been a beautiful thing. I try and play it really cool when I attend, that this isn't a big deal, but it is a big deal. It's grown over time, but within that space, we do talk about books like Teresa was saying, but actually I'll kind of put out some pedagogy with RFP informally, And like last time I spoke about barriers to reading, and it kind of just gives us that chance to talk about what it is to be a reader. So we're delving into that. Tech came out from the parents' feedback, and tiredness and busyness. And actually, Audible, when I talk to parents, I have those informal conversations, sorry, not just Audible, any listening device with stories, autobiographies, things like that, listening, it's a really accessible way in, and parents are really open to it, as am I. So we do give library cards and forms out to the children as well, and try to encourage visiting the library. It's great CPD for me. I get to see lots of beautiful picture books. Really, the main thing, I think, is trying to be a reading role model, sharing your identity, being honest about it. You can do a beautiful teacher display, but actually, if you just have on it a few books that you want to talk about, that can get a real book buzz going, and children really value that. They can see what you're currently reading and talk to you about it. And then also this, talking about the barriers. I know when I started at my school, it was quite a brave thing to actually really mean the rights of the reader, and actually saying to children, you can give up on a book. And it still does sit a little bit uncomfortably with me. However, I think we need to embrace the rights of the reader a lot more, and say that, you know, a bit like when I was talking about my eldest daughter, she's still a reader, even though she finds it hard. And she's still a reader if she gives up on a book, like when I gave up on, in fact, I've given up on A Discovery of Witches twice because I really wanted to read it. I should love that book, but I didn't. And that she's still a reader if she's reading something that her friends don't like. I suppose this is really addressing that we're all readers, and it just looks different. The barriers to reading are just as diverse as our reading identities, our preferences, our habits. And when I now talk about my reading identity at school, and the teachers do, often when we have World Book Day, it's a time that we'll do that, we'll also be more honest about our barriers as well. And I think we have to welcome that conversation with parents, with the children, with staff, and be honest about it, because then we're going to welcome more children into feeling like reading is for them. It doesn't have to look perfect. As much as I love Matilda in the book and film, that's one version of being a reader. There are lots of different types of readers. So yeah, absolutely be honest, and also never give up. I always bang the drum about RFP and how important it is. And even just by focusing on 3 children in my class every year for the last 4 years, it always has an impact on the whole class. You don't have to worry about hitting every child with RFP and knowing all of their preferences. Obviously, that would be an ideal, an absolute, you know, an amazing thing to do. But we're really busy. And I think if you just say to yourself, just 3 children I'm going to notice, and I'm going to find out about what they're interested in, and then I'm going to try and gift them a book or talk to them about their reading lives, that naturally has a massive impact.
Thank you. I wonder if we should just address some of the things that have turned up in the chat. So a brilliant point about connecting to school library service, and actually even public library services. We know that those are very keen to be engaged with schools from the things they're saying to us, especially around World Book Day. There's a question here around presenting reading aloud to secondary pupils. I've got a couple of examples, and I'm sure colleagues have too. A couple of people start that in a secondary setting, and obviously it's good for time activity. And some people started with listening to audiobooks together rather than having a teacher reading aloud. So building the habit by starting with an audiobook that felt like a more socially acceptable, perhaps a more adult behaviour for some of those children, and that has been a successful strategy. And actually they've moved on to the adult in the room reading either extracts or books as part of an instruction system and form time. So that was just one example that I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, we run an Open University Reading Schools programme for Key Stage 3, and this year we found some really exciting examples where educators there are trying to, in Key Stage 3, introduce a richer reading for better culture, where the young people are engaged and involved. And they've done that by finding out about the readers, just as Amy was describing, focusing on the young people, focusing on their barriers, focusing on the positives, and then beginning to build from that. Joe Westbrook from the University of Sussex did some really interesting research on Read Aloud, which highlighted that sustained read aloud in English lessons, this was, across a 16-week, I think, period, was making a significant difference to the young people, particularly the less engaged, particularly the boys in that particular study who perhaps had, researchers argue, perhaps had a rather limited diet before because they'd been seen to need catch-up. So they'd had perhaps more limited texts or more tedious texts that they weren't interested in. But when they were offered edgy, contemporary text, read aloud at pace, so people are hanging on every word, why those young people were moving forward and moving faster than their peers who are already keen readers. So I think reading aloud, but also providing some time with informed time in secondary, as many of our colleagues have, to give the young people some time to read and to talk, to make recommendations to one another, to share what they're reading. And of course, some of them aren't reading. So that whole notion of creating a profile in a fabulous library here in Chesterton, so creating a profile in the secondary school, in the corridors, in the assembly hall, in the dinner hall, where reading matters, reading's exciting. These are the new books coming out. These are the pictures of some of the kids in key stage 3, year 7 or whatever, who have been their favourite books, and they're making their own display. So it's back to that young people's choice and ownership of the space. If we pull back holding the reins and give them the space to lead us and learn from them, they'll very often be more interested in the enterprise. That's certainly what research suggests.
And so linking into that idea of choice, one of the techniques that Amy referred to, using a reading blanket, one of the methods that she introduces her own reading history. But we know lots of practitioners who've worked with us, particularly in primary, have been using I've forgotten the word now.
Book blanket.
A book blanket. That's what I was going to say. Using book blankets, which is actually an opportunity to lay out a whole range of texts for children to make choices from. And that's just as simple as laying out texts on the tabletops, covering them with lots of books for children to look at. A great way for children to explore perhaps what you have in your book folder in your classroom, and making that open opportunity to move around the room, browse, chat, sit where you like, talk to who you like, pick them up, put them down, choose one, not choose one. And lots of opportunity then for children to be supported with how they make choices through using a book blanket. And there's some great examples of that on our website if you want to take a look at the examples of practice. That's a book blanket is an opportunity. And I think there's also a question in the chat, Amy, that I think maybe you want to pick up about your parents' reading route.
Yeah, so at my school, we do invite parents in to kind of read for pleasure alongside the children. That will be, that's the pitch fiction and information books. But I've actually got a book club that is like Teresa's book club, an adult book club, where we meet it sounds awful, we meet at a local pub, but it's all very contained. We've actually got a dojo page as well. So that's how I run it. They've all got little dojo monsters. So I can kind of have a story and we can vote on books and choose the books that we have. We've read Persuasion, and then there were None, which started my Agatha Christie obsession. The Giver of Stars, which again, I should technically love that book, but I gave up on it. And I was in a real battle about going to the book club and telling them that, leading this group as RFP lead, just wasn't for me, but actually I used that to inform the discussion, and someone that hadn't enjoyed the Agatha Christie book loved that one. So we're kind of talking about our reading preferences there. We're currently reading The Tattooist of Auschwitz, so I'm thinking carefully next week when we meet about how I'll structure that conversation, but it's only maybe 12 of us from across school, and staff are always told what the read is and they'll dip in and out as well, but it just gives us that reading community and a reading focus, and yeah, it's wonderful. I look forward to it, and I do think it's a brave thing to do because it's taking your relationship with parents in a little bit of a different direction, so I manage that. And I'm still, they know I'm called Amy, I'm still Mrs. Greatrex to them, but I'm honest about my reading preferences, habits, and now barriers as well.
I think, Amy, it's very likely that some of those parents will want to come and join as volunteer parents in school, but that even by supporting them, even if they don't do that, even by supporting them as readers and having honest conversations, recognising the nature of reading in the 21st century, etc., they're making connections with one another, and that's the kind of connections we want them to make with their children. The OECD data is really clear. Those children who achieve the most, age 15, in terms of attainment data, have parents who enjoy reading. and those parents source books for them from the bookshop, from the library, from charity shops. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have a lot of resource money to buy on those books, but they actually have a positive disposition towards reading as adults that fosters the young person's positive disposition. Really powerful, brilliant, exciting to hear about it.
Thank you. And we've got a question there about secondary, somebody asking the best way to train up other staff. I mean, I would suggest, we've already mentioned our looking at the OURFP website. There's lots of examples of practice from secondary practitioners sharing how they've gone about that. So if you want to take a look at the website, there's lots of examples there. Someone's also asking for book recommendations, which again, there's lots of those on our website too. We've got a top text section, and also an awards section. And I guess that's another thing to explore, is how you can key into some of those book awards. There are lots of book awards out there for children now that are supporting you as practitioners to find the best quality books to share. Not to mean that you're not sharing anything that your children are interested in, but one of the ways you can get to know a wider range of texts. So do take a look at the summary of the different book awards and key into those to support you.
I think I'd say about the notion of how do you get to know, how do you tempt the staff in who aren't interested? My own sense is, I mean, you treat them as children, but you take the same principle. Got to get to know them. So if I know this, I mean, my friend Jean will send me various books, or we swap books because she knows me and she knows what I like to read, as it were. And sometimes she gets it wrong, but most of the time she gets it right because she knows me. So if I know Nathan, or if I know this member of staff has, particular hobbies, particular interests, particular fascinations in the world, then I can find a range of fiction, non-fiction, poetry, graphic novels, whatever it is. And if she's never read a graphic novel and I think this one's hilarious and she likes funny books, I might try it and say, you might hate it, you might love it. Graphic novels, some people, it's a bit of a Marmite situation often, but go through it, see what you reckon. And then we end up with another conversation. Now that's not really that different from working with deeper, whoever in your class, as it were, sharing books, recommendations, and not expecting her to love it, but expecting her to, expecting is the wrong word, hoping for a conversation that may emerge from that. So yeah, I think the strategy is pretty much the same.
Can I jump in there? So we ran some focus groups with secondary school librarians earlier this year, and they voted very hard on the side of bribery. So there were various talks of competitions to encourage. So if you could get the more people to read a book, the most people to read a book, then you could win a prize at the end of term. So it was hosted from the library, of course, and there were prizes provided. And actually that came up quite a few times in terms of having some sort of reward system for staff trying and encouraging each other and starting those conversations and finding and making the same spaces. So lots of the same kinds of points. And your website is excellent, of course, but we also have some specifically World Book Day activity ideas being suggested by practitioners from early years all the way up to secondary. Some great examples on there as well for some of the maybe the more celebratory, wild, out there World Book Day style ideas too, and all aligned to the 6 principles too. So take a look at that as well.
I think we're almost at the end of our webinar this evening. We've just had a few.
I don't know if any more questions come up in the chat. They were just, and somebody's just said about giving staff time to read, dedicated to staff meeting. And I'm sure those of you that are going to join us for the vlog series and watch some of those films are going to hear from practitioners who are going to be making those suggestions. In fact, I think one of them's advocating for us having a book inset day in one of the films we're going to share. So I know that's going to come up. Yeah, somebody said, what a dream it is. It isn't necessarily just a dream. Maybe some of us are going to get to do it. Kate, you're just going to tell us to wrap up then about the vlog series.
Yeah, great. So you've heard a bit of a structure of how those vlogs are going to be have been put together today. So in each instance, we've invited staff to the practitioners to reflect on themselves as readers around that barrier, to reflect on the behaviours that they demonstrate, to then think about whether they recognise those behaviours occurring in the classrooms in front of them, and then some of the strategies that they might use or have tried or have just thought about as they've been in conversation with each other, or their dreams for whole day book inset spa days. So we're going to be, yeah, I know, it's such a good idea. I know. I think that's maybe what we should make World Book Day. So I think well, you'll hear that structure kind of in each of the four. It is four, isn't it? I've not made that. I'm good. In each of the 4 sessions, you'll hear that same structure, and we hope that that is a useful one to help you think along the same lines and to respond in exactly the way you have done this evening. And we'd like to thank you for being such an engaged and receptive audience. It's not easy on Zoom to feel like you're part of a group, and it really has done this evening. And so I'm going to wrap up with the World Book Day campaign lead line this year, which is Read Your Way, which is our public response to all of the things that we've sort of spoken about this evening. That is intended to support children to understand that reading isn't just work, and it isn't just this set of barriers, but is an opportunity to engage with something that really connects with your interests. So for this World Book Day, we're really going to be encouraging children and their families and their teachers and everyone who's around them to read in the way that really suits them, to help them feel more like the child choosing the book on the bookshelf, and a little bit less like the child feeling like they have to write it down in their reading record. So we hope you found this useful. We really, really hope that you stay engaged with the series of films. Debbie and I've had the privilege of listening into those conversations, and they are glorious. So we're really looking forward to sharing those with you, and we really hope that you'll come back together with us in June to carry on that conversation. And we're going to have a think about how we might keep engaged in a more kind of interactive way in that space between, but we'll be in touch with you over email around any of those opportunities. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.